All right, thank you all for coming to the second pre-departure session here. So introductions we already did. Okay, so our agenda today is I just have a brief reminder about the academic stuff we talked about last week. I'm going to talk a bit about travel planning, money and communication, health, the serious safety and responsibility stuff, and then next steps. Okay, so academic stuff, just a reminder, I already actually issued the permits and sent out an email on Tuesday. So if you haven't gotten an email, please feel free to contact me. If you have any questions, contact me. But it's free to register for the University 492 on campus, which is just the placeholder that'll say you're a student while you're studying abroad. And normally you register for 12 credits unless you have a very specific scholarship that requires that you be registered for 15 credits. And then you can take however many credits you need abroad, and it'll transfer back as whatever you took. Any questions about that? Okay, excellent. Okay, so jumping into travel planning. You may either at this point be able to go ahead and purchase your airline ticket, or this might be something that's coming up very shortly. Oftentimes people wonder, when is the best time to buy my airline ticket? I think sometimes people think the earlier the better, but that's actually not necessarily the case. Sometimes if you purchase an airline ticket too far in advance, the airlines know that you really want to go on those particular dates, and so the prices are a little bit higher. So they usually, when the airline tickets become available, they're at kind of a medium high price, and then they slowly start to drop as you get a little bit closer. And then once you get really close to the time that you're going to leave, they start to spike pretty quickly. And then an airline ticket right before you leave is really, really expensive. It does really depend on the place you're going, on how full the planes are, and a whole bunch of other things, exactly when the best time is to buy an airline ticket. Usually, as a very generic general statement, somewhere between 90 days and 30 days in advance is going to be usually where on average the best prices are. There has been some research that's been done on this that has said, generically speaking, maybe around 60 days in advance, but it does vary. So what I really recommend is, if you have kind of a general idea of when you might be flying, is to start keeping an eye on what those prices are, because then if the prices drop really, a noticeable amount on one particular day, then you'll know that that's a really good price, and then you can jump on purchasing your airline ticket. One thing, this may not come up as much for you guys, usually airline tickets you can only purchase somewhere between 9 months and 12 months in advance. So it's mostly a problem for year-long students who might be trying to purchase a return ticket during the summer and they don't come back for, I want to purchase my airline ticket in July and I don't come back until the end of next June. They might run into that return ticket not being available. You guys probably won't run into that so much. You can probably purchase an airline ticket now that'll be anytime during the summer for your return. But if you do happen to run into that, one question that comes up is whether it's better to do a round trip and then change that return date, or whether it's better to do 2 one-way tickets. Usually the round trip is better. One-way tickets are usually significantly more expensive than half of the price of a round trip ticket. Just the airlines, I think, want to keep their planes full. That said, that's not a universal thing. I have had some students recently who have started to find one-way tickets that have been pretty affordable, much closer to half of the cost of a round trip ticket. One key thing to know with the 2 one-way ticket things is some countries do require that you have a return ticket in order to get a visa. So watch out for that if that's the case. Because they want to make sure that you aren't entering and not planning on leaving. And then the other thing with the round trip ticket is, if you do think that there's a possibility that you might be changing your ticket at some point, you might want to travel, or your plans at the end of the semester might change or something like that. It's really important to know what the change fees are. So it would be the cost of changing that, so that you don't end up really surprised down the road. Change fees can be pretty significant. So it's not uncommon for a change fee on an international ticket to be $250 or $350 plus any difference in fee. And some airlines will let you use a difference in fare. Like if you buy a cheaper ticket, they'll let you use that difference in fare as a credit towards the change fee, and some airlines won't. United a couple of years ago changed their policy. So they used to let you count that against it, and now they don't. They just give you a credit towards another ticket. So if you are thinking about that, the way to find it is there's usually fare rules that are at some point when you're going through and purchasing, and there's a big block of text. I looked on the United site and the Delta site, and they do seem to be doing an okay job. They'll usually label it as penalties. So these are the penalties assessed if you change your ticket, and then it'll have a number that's in kind of a block of text that'll tell you that. One thing to, I guess, kind of compare in addition to checking Google Flights and Kayak and those types of sites is also take a look, especially at STA Travel, possibly Student Universe. Those are both student-focused travel agencies. So sometimes they do have discounted tickets specifically for students. You might find some good prices there. Sometimes it's just the exact same price you find anywhere else. So, you know, just worth doing a comparison. And sometimes with those student tickets, they may also have differences in the terms and conditions on them. So it might be significantly cheaper to change an airline ticket that's purchased that way. Sometimes I'll see it for $50 to change an airline ticket instead of $250. But also make sure that you do check that because some of those student discount tickets just cannot be changed under any circumstances. So just keep an eye on that if you think you might want to change things. I'll also say too, if you're planning on traveling after your program is over, another thing that people will do sometimes is they will just purchase a return from somewhere. Like I'm studying in Spain, but I'm going to do a return ticket out of Paris, and I'm going to figure it out later, my details of how I'm going to get there. And that seems to work for people pretty well. And then we do have a handy travel resources page on our website, so take a look at that. Other things to kind of think about, packing. So as you are starting to get a little bit closer, take a look for the airline ticket that you buy and see what your baggage allowance is. A lot of times with your checked suitcase, they will give you a measurement in linear inches for the size of your suitcase. So that is for one measurement of the height, one measurement of the width, and one measurement of the depth, all added together. So they may say, 52 linear inches, and that's adding one each of those three dimensions. I don't know why they do it that way, but, and then they'll often give you a weight allowance as well for your checked suitcase. Commonly that's been about 50 pounds, but double check, especially if you end up using any discount carriers in Europe at any point, those may have much more restrictive things. But international, if you buy an international ticket that includes all the legs, it should be the same rules throughout. And then the thing on the side there, take less than you think you'll need. Every time I travel, I carry less stuff. I will say when I studied abroad, it was still okay to take 2 70-pound suitcases. So that's what I did. And it was just crazy heavy and awkward, and I didn't need half that stuff. Usually, in addition to your checked bag, you also get 2 items to take on the plane. One is a carry-on suitcase, which is usually kind of your standard 20, 21-inch kind of suitcase. And then you also get a personal item, which can be a laptop bag, a backpack, a purse, something like that. And the key with the personal item is that it has to be able to fit under the seat back in front of you, so down by your feet. With those carry-on suitcases, honestly, most of the time, they don't seem to have a weight restriction on them, or they don't measure if they do. I can't say that's universal though, so don't pack all of your bricks in your in your carry-on bag. But that might be a good place to put heavier items as opposed to weighing down your bigger suitcase that you're going to check. In your carry-on, you do want to bring things that you really don't want to lose. So things, if you have any medical supplies or anything like that, any valuables, do somewhere have a photocopy of your passport. I usually just actually email that to myself. It does have your birth date on it, which is a piece of personal information as well as your name, but it doesn't have your social security number or anything like that. So it's not got too much personal information in terms of keeping it in a digital space. It's also good somewhere to have the information from your credit card, especially the phone number to call, just in case you lose your card or something like that, so you are able to call and cancel it. And then as far as valuables go, if you have any electronics or anything like that, definitely put those things in your carry-on. If you have anything that's like the necklace that was given to you by your beloved deceased grandmother, I would just really recommend leaving that at home, because when you're traveling, it's really easy to misplace things or have somebody grab it from sitting next to you on a chair or something like that. And I'd feel really bad if you had anything that was irreplaceable that ended up going missing while you were traveling. And then the last thing with electronics, there's two things to keep in mind. One is that a lot of times when you're in other countries, they use different plugs. So the actual metal pieces that go into the wall are arranged in a different way. For example, in the UK, the plugs are at an angle, and then there's a third one in the middle. In a lot of mainland Europe, they have two circular plugs. That's not a real big deal. You can just buy a plug converter on Amazon or go to Target or something like that. And you can actually buy those in sets. So they'll have a travel set that's like a little cube thing sometimes, that'll have all of the different common plug adapters that you might need. And then you can just plug your plug-in into that and then plug that into the wall. The other thing to know, though, is that some locations in the world have different current levels of current. So we're on 110 here. It's really common in Europe for them to be on 220. Going to Japan, they're on 100, which is close enough for most things to work pretty well. Most of your kind of modern high-end electronics, so like your laptop, your phone, your iPad, your Kindle, those types of things, will operate on a range. So you can just look at the plug, the brick that goes with your plug-in, and it'll say something like 100 to 220. And if it says that, then it'll operate on any range of those things. It'll just use the amount of power that it needs. Other electronics, though, like your hair dryer, your curling iron, your flat iron, your alarm clock, your blender, any of those types of things, if you were to plug them into 220, they will just spark out, basically. Or if you plug them in a hotel, they might, cause the power to go out in the hotel and make everyone sad. So those things are usually better to just purchase when you get there. You can buy a step converter that'll adjust up or adjust down, but they honestly don't work very well and they're extremely heavy. So it's usually with those types of things, it's just cheaper and easier to purchase it when you get there. Or, think about different ways like showering at night and letting your hair dry overnight or something like that, if any of those types of options work. Any questions? Yeah.
If we forget something, we just go to Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
But if we forget something, is it pretty easy to get it?
For the most part, yeah. It's usually pretty easy to get things there. You might go to a different type of store than you go here, but it's most of the things that you would need, you're going to be able to find pretty easily. So, yeah. Okay, quick overview of at the airport here. So just in case you haven't been through this process, when you go to the airport, you first go to a check-in desk and you show them your passport. They may have you do it at the kiosk and scan your passport and stuff like that these days. They do also at that point double check that you have any travel documents that you need. So if you need a visa, they're going to make sure that you have one. They are very firm about that. So if you don't have the visa that you need, they will not let you get on the airplane. And the reason is because the countries actually fine the airlines if they bring somebody to the country that isn't allowed to enter. So the airlines are very motivated to catch that. Once you've checked in, given them any check suitcases that you have, then you go up to airport security. I say up to because I'm envisioning the Fargo airport. And then once you go through airport security, then you get on your flight, you go to your other country. Once you get to there, you stand usually in a very long line and go through immigration, which is a government official who's there, who's double checking that you have any visas that you need, and then they'll stamp your passport with an entry stamp. And then you usually get fed into an area where you pick up your suitcase, and often we'll go through another little mini line for customs. Customs is where you declare anything that's kind of out of the ordinary that you're bringing into the country. And then if you are continuing on to another flight, they will have you recheck your bag. So usually there's just a conveyor belt that you just toss your bag back onto. And then in the US, so coming back, they will actually make you go through security again. But in other countries, usually you're fed back into the secure area. It's just in the US, for whatever reason, we don't necessarily trust the security that was done in other countries. Or if you are at your final destination, then right after customs, that's when you get to leave the airport and go on your way. As far as airport security goes, don't leave your bags unattended. I think that's kind of common sense these days, but if you go to the bathroom, you have to take it with you and, bring it into the little bathroom stall and stuff like that. If you do happen to be traveling with someone, you guys can kind of alternate watching out for each other, but if you leave your suitcase somewhere, then they're going to worry that it's a nefarious suitcase. So don't do that and make people worry. It says you will be asked. You won't necessarily be asked, but you could be asked if anyone's asked you to pack something for them. That's screening for somebody, like giving you drugs to carry from one country to another or something like that. So if anyone comes up to you and says, here, can you take this bag in your suitcase? Don't do it, right? Only pack things that you know what they are. 311. Has anyone run into the 311 guidelines? What is it? Do you remember?
3 ounces, and 1 bottle,
Mhm.
clear, 1.
Yeah. So for liquids that you take in your carry-on, this 311 rule applies. Liquids in your checked suitcase, they don't care. You could just have one gigantic bag full of liquid in your suitcase, and as long as it met the weight restrictions, you'd be fine. But for your carry-on, they're very specific. So it's a 1 quart size baggie, so this kind of size here. And then it's I think it's technically 3.4 ounces for each bottle that's in there. And then you can put as many bottles in as will fit in the baggie. But that's for liquids and gels. So if you have any gel lip liner or lip gloss kind of stuff, toothpaste, those types of things, those all technically need to be in that bag as well. So yeah, if you have anything that's larger, put it in your big suitcase. I'd still recommend putting it in a Ziploc because it might leak, but you don't have to technically. But it does all have to fit in the 1 quart size for carrying it in your carry-on. And also, it is worthwhile if you have anything that's a little unusual to go onto the TSA website and take a look at. They have a whole list of exceptions and special cases. Like, I think it's 2 snow globes that you can have that are outside of the rules, something. So there's a bunch of extra stuff. And then the other thing is there's all sorts of rules for customs in terms of what you can and cannot bring into different countries. Coming back into the US, for instance, you're not allowed to bring meat or vegetables or seeds. Technically, you're not allowed to bring sand back into the US. The reason for those things is because of invasive species and things that might come in and harm our ecosystem here. So plants that come in and don't have natural creatures that naturally eat it, so then they just take over everything. So they need to be really careful to not have that stuff kind of transmitting. And that does include, for instance, if you're on the airplane and they give you an apple and you don't finish your apple, you can't take that off the plane and take it into the country that you're going to. You have to, there's usually bins, you have to throw it away before you go through. But they'll generally have pretty good signs about that. Yeah, and then they may have certain things that you need to declare that are fine within certain limits, but you can take a look at that before you travel if you have anything that seems to be a little bit unusual. As an example, I brought a cat back from Japan, and they were much more worried about about the dry cat food that technically had meat in it than they were worried about the cat itself. So sometimes it's surprising. Yeah.
Do you recommend bringing like toothpaste and shampoo, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, going for a semester, I think it's pretty common for people to bring some amount of that, just especially for when you first arrive, to have a little bit to kind of get you through so you don't have to worry too much when you first get there about finding it. But it can be a lot to try to bring enough for an entire semester. So maybe just, weigh it a little bit in terms of convenience versus you can find it there. It just might be a slightly different brand or something like that. So.
About your clothes there?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second with a suggestion. But it kind of answered probably not. Yeah, I'd probably bring clothes. Okay, so yeah. Oh yeah.
Amazon?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
ordered something on Amazon, but they should-
Yeah, usually you'd be ordering it from Amazon dot whatever the thing is for the country that you're going to. But yeah, there's usually Amazon in other countries. The shipping prices might vary depending on where you're at. So you could just go online and look for the Amazon that's in that country and see, what are the prices on various things. I will say, in terms of keeping costs down for buying things abroad, it is helpful if you're flexible at all about, the brand of what it is. If you're trying to get a very specific product from the US, those can be a little bit more expensive because they can be import prices to that country, in which case then you might want to bring stuff, use the weight and the space, and that'll save you in the long run. But if you're flexible at all, like a couple of different brands might work, that could help. And help keep the cost down and give you options like ordering from an Amazon there or buying in stores and things like that. So yeah, no, that's a good question. Okay, flights. Do I not actually? Oh, I guess I don't have I was thinking I had a slide in there. So I guess to answer your question now, as far as clothes go, one thing that I think is helpful is to think in terms of how much you like your clothes. So you're just inherently going to have less clothes than you normally do when you're traveling because you didn't bring your entire suitcase. And so you're going to end up wearing clothes more often than you probably would normally. And so I think a lot of times they get a little bit more worn by the end of the semester. So if you bring things that you like, but maybe aren't your favorite things in the world, then if they start to wear and be a little bit more shabby, then you can throw them at the end of the semester. And then things that you buy, like souvenirs and stuff like that, then you can put them in the space that those things were in before. So it's kind of thinking a little bit strategically going forward. The other thing too, related to the electronic side of things is one thing that I travel with all the time is, and this sounds crazy, an extension cord. I have an extension cord with 3 different plug-in spots on it. And the reason for that is because when I go someplace abroad that has a different plug for plugging into the wall, then I only need the one adapter. So I can plug the extension cord in and then use my US plugins to plug into that US plug shape. The really important thing though is that you do not want to take a surge protector, the more expensive ones, because if you're going someplace where they're on 220, it's going to blow itself, because that's what it's supposed to do, is it's supposed to prevent voltage surges. What you want is the cheaper one, the one that's like $5 or something like that, for a power strip. So just in this case, buy the cheap, the cheap thing, and that'll be perfect. Yeah.
How do we find out what their outlets?
Yeah, you can Google it. I'll also mention we'll have it all set up for you to download, but there's going to be an Alert Traveler app that you're going to have access to as an NDSU student that kind of ties into all the application stuff. And that has information about the adapters and the power level and current and stuff like that. Yeah. Do you have another question?
I just read first.
Mhm.
The list.
Mhm.
American.
Yeah, and you can just search the name of the country and then plug too, and it should pull it up too.
One thing about clothes that you might think about is make sure you have.
Mm.
I was in Victoria and I had to make a feed for from America, but I couldn't find what shoes on. And then sometimes style or something that you job is gonna style or it's gonna fit you out.
Yeah.
How much do you want to like buy there so you can like wear local t-shirts and like support? What was your experience? How many?
I bought a little bit, but honestly, I'm big for a Japanese person, so there wasn't a whole lot that fit me really well. So I ended up having to shop at the Gap there anyway, which wasn't probably investing too much in the local economy. But depending on the country that you're going to. Another thing to think about too is a lot of times when you're going to other non-US locations, they often dress a little bit differently than we do. I mean, you guys are all wearing kind of dark, plain clothing right now. So you guys would blend really well as you are. But in the US, we tend to wear things, with NDSU on it or, sports teams or things like that. And that's a very American look. So if you're wearing those types of clothing abroad, they're going to be able to tell right away that you're an American. You'll also find a lot of times that people in other countries tend to dress up more than we do. So it's really common for us to wear athletic shoes and things like that. Versus that's not so common in other places. And that's not to say that you need to go out and buy all new clothes or to stress about that. It's just to be aware that the things that you wear are communicating information about you to other people. And, if you dress like an American, then people are going to just recognize more that you're an American, for better or for worse. I think there's good things and bad things that come from that. But and then the other thing with packing is I do think it's really helpful for kind of getting your clothes compacted as much as possible to roll your clothes. So you just kind of fold them into a long rectangle and then roll them into kind of a little ball. And that usually, or into a tube kind of, you can usually fit more clothing that way. And then also it helps to keep the wrinkles down when you do that. So, yeah. I think I maybe had 3 that I had taken with me for different kind of scenarios. If you have big shoes that you're bringing, like a pair of boots or something like that, those are the types of things I'd recommend wearing on the airplane. It depends on the airport that you're going out from, but some airports in the US require that you take your shoes off still. So you have to kind of be aware that you may have awkwardness with untying shoelaces or things like that. But the big shoes, if you wear them on the plane, then you're not having a heavy, big object that's taking up so much space in your suitcase. And then the other ones you can kind of put in the suitcase, and you may want to shove them full of socks or underwear or something like that to use that space that's inside the shoe, so that it's really only taking up the amount of space that the actual physical part of your shoe takes up. Yeah. It's also nice to bring layers in terms of being able to, dress for different weather. So if you're able to add or take away layers, you can adjust to temperatures being higher or lower than you expect as needed. So yeah, good questions. And then as far as your flights go, one thing that I really recommend is that if you have someone that's picking you up at the airport, to make sure that you give them all of your flight itinerary. So don't just give them, I'm supposed to arrive on this day at this time. Give them not just the flight that's arriving, but give them the full schedule all the way from when you leave. And the reason for that is that if you have a delay that causes you to get bumped to a different flight or something like that, they'll be able to look back when you don't arrive and see, oh, okay, one of those flights was delayed, so she's probably coming in at a different time. Versus if you just say you're supposed to be arriving at this time, then they're kind of limited in what they can do if you don't happen to arrive at the time that you were scheduled. It's also good to have the contact information of the person who's supposed to be picking you up if you can get that. And also if you're able to have backup information on how to get to the place that you're supposed to be going to. Hopefully you won't need it, usually people don't. But just if anything for peace of mind, if there's any flight delays or anything like that, you'll feel better knowing that you have a backup plan in place. Okay, jet lag. Anyone had the joy of jet lag? Okay, what was that like?
I don't know, it was weird. I went on a school trip to Greece.
Oh yeah.
And all of us, all my friends and I, after we got back, would be up at 3 a.m. and we'd all be texting each other, like, are you up too?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, the kind of rule of thumb that I've heard is to expect it to take about as many days as there are time zones. So you're probably going to be fine going to Mexico. Yeah, but going someplace that it's a 7-hour difference or a 12-hour difference, it's going to be a pretty significant time. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think kind of maximum 12, because then you're kind of almost like decreasing it at a certain point. But yeah, it's a big deal. Yeah. So yeah, so jet lag is caused by traveling to a different time zone. The common the common characteristics are fatigue, insomnia, and irritability, because why am I not sleeping when I want to sleep, and why am I sleeping when I don't want to sleep? Personally, going in one direction, I'll find that it's like you get to a point where you just can't be awake anymore and you're just asleep and there's no control over that situation. Going in the other direction, it's like, okay, I love sleep. Why is this not happening? This is the worst thing ever. It's so annoying. The kind of keys to minimizing jet lag as best you can, drink lots of water, and that's more of a general health thing. So when you're on the plane, anytime the flight attendants bring around a beverage, drink something. It unfortunately will mean you'll have to use the tiny airplane bathroom more than you probably want, but it is really good for your health and to kind of ward off getting sick, which can happen when you travel. Stretch, exercise. So even though the airplane seats are kind of tiny, you can still, reach forward to stretch or stretch your ankles a little bit. When you get up to go to the bathroom, maybe stretch a little bit in the aisle, stand for a minute or two before you sit down again. And that just helps to get the blood moving and stuff like that. And that can help you feel a little bit better. And then a lot of times what happens when you get on a plane is that at a certain point after you've taken off, they'll usually feed you. And then a lot of times they'll close all the windows and then it's go to sleep time. So if the lights are turned off on the plane, if you're able to, go to sleep, because they're deliberately doing that with the timing to try to get you to get some rest before you're going to arrive. And then when you get to the country that you're going to, try to stay up until it's approaching a reasonable time for you to go to sleep. So if you can stay up until 8 o'clock at night or something like that, that's really going to help you to adjust to the new time schedule so much faster than if you go to bed early because you're just tired. And sometimes that means go for a really long walk, like go for a 6-hour walk of misery. But that will in sum total, everything's going to be so much easier if you have one afternoon that's kind of miserable, and then you get on a proper sleep schedule in the place that you're in. So that's what I always do. The first day stinks, and then after that, you just get used to it pretty quickly. So also, be patient with yourself, just be aware it's going to take a little bit longer. When you're in a new culture and stuff like that, you're just going to need extra sleep and all those types of things. So just be kind to yourself. Any questions? Okay, money and communication. So a couple of things with money. The first is I do recommend some kind of budget. At a bare minimum, you can just take the amount of money that you have to spend over the course of the semester and divide it out by the number of weeks that you have there and get an idea of this is kind of the maximum that I should be spending per week. And if you notice that you're spending more than that, then be aware that that's going to be taken off the amount that you can spend at the end of the semester. So you might be stuck eating the local equivalent of ramen noodles by the end of the semester, or asking your parents for money or something like that if you are continuing to do that. There are, of course, complex budgeting apps and things like that, but I think just having that awareness is enough to kind of help you keep on track and to be aware of the give and take of spending money in one place versus another. Most commonly, people access their money through some combination of credit cards, cash, and ATMs. ATMs are really nice because you can use your ATM card to take out money in the local currency, and it works just like here. With an ATM, it is important to contact your bank before you leave and ask them what are the fees for using your ATM card abroad. They may have a set flat fee that they charge you. So for example, I bank with Wells Fargo and they charge me the same $5 non-Wells Fargo ATM fee here in the Union or in Japan. And so knowing that they're going to charge me $5 per withdrawal, that's going to affect the amount that I would take out at any given time. I probably wouldn't take out the equivalent of $20, but I feel okay taking out the equivalent of $100. Yeah.
They'll refund for ATM policies.
Yes. Yep. And some banks are awesome like that. So, and some of them, and maybe Bell Bank does this, will refund the fee on the other side too. So if there's an ATM on the other side that has a fee, some of them will do that. Do you know, do they do that? Okay. Yeah, they might.
Bell Bank.
I have Wells Fargo and I like have to sign up for like this national card.
Mm,
So like it was technically like I couldn't use it in the US, but like when I used it, I was in Peru.
okay.
Like it didn't charge me other
Oh.
than like the ATM. But
Interesting. Yeah, it might be a special feature or some new product that they have or something. Yeah, that's cool.
it's just like, you know, back when they used to have like blue like debit cards.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like that, but just like way sparklier and shiny.
Ooh,
Too, like one of them was like kind of
yeah.
international, like sparkly stuff.
Well, I'll have to talk to Wells Fargo and see if they'll give me one of these sparkly cards. This is exciting news. Okay. Yeah. And also you want to make sure to let them know that you're traveling and where you're traveling to, so that if they see withdrawals suddenly in Greece, that they're not like, oh, somebody has stolen your card. So, so they'll just have you give them a general idea of when you'll be traveling, so that if they see charges come or withdrawals come through, they know what's going on. Credit cards also are very commonly used abroad. It is really nice that we've switched over to the cards with chips in them, because that's really common around the world for them. We use chip and signature here. Most other places in the world, especially Europe, seem to use chip and PIN, meaning that when people are using their cards, they have to enter a PIN on some sort of little PIN pad. They're usually you can use both in the same systems, but you may run into people being surprised because they're so used to chip and PIN. They may be surprised when the machine tells them that you need a signature. And so they may go, oh, pen, where do we find a pen? So maybe carry a pen. But that's usually pretty straightforward. Every once in a while, maybe in a train station or something like that, you'll find cases where the automated machines can't accept chip and signature, and usually it's just a matter of finding a window to have somebody run it manually in that case. But if you're running into that, it might be worthwhile just to bring some cash along as a backup in case you are someplace after hours or something like that. And also with your credit card, call them, let them know you're traveling, check on any fees. There are some credit cards that don't have international transaction fees. I've had a Capital One card forever because they don't charge that. I know there's other credit card companies that don't charge fees. With credit cards, they seem to more often charge a percentage fee on international transactions instead of a flat fee. So that can kind of add up depending on how many charges you have going on. So maybe check into those two pieces sooner rather than later, just in case you do want to make any changes to save yourself on fees and stuff like that. Sometimes people do open up bank accounts abroad. If you don't have to do that, I'd recommend not bothering to do it because it is sometimes a little annoying. Not terrible, but you might need to have documentation or your birth certificate or something like that. If you do need to open an account, usually your school will walk you through anything that you need for that and help you set up the account. Usually if you do, it's because there's some sort of stipend you're going to be getting, or you have to pay rent out of a bank account or something like that. Other things that might be useful for your taxes, sometimes people will get a power of attorney set up, like have your parents be a power of attorney. That just means that they're able to sign documents in your stead as if they were you. Sometimes banks will have power of attorney forms. You can set up somebody as a power of attorney for financial matters. Different banks will have different policies or different kind of scopes of what their power of attorney form includes. So you can check with them. Sometimes if anyone has paper checks anymore, I don't even know. I don't really use them ever. People will just leave a signed check with a family member if you have a car payment or something that gets paid that way, so they can fill it out and go ahead and do payments. You can also add somebody to your bank account. One important thing to know is that sometimes they won't let you take someone off once they've been added. So for example, when I was abroad, I added my mom to my savings account. And then when I got back, I actually had to close that savings account and open a new one because Wells Fargo, it was too much risk to take somebody off of an account. Any owner can close it, but you can't just arbitrarily take people's access away. So if you have automatic debits or something set up, that part of it can be annoying. And then of course, online banking, which is awesome, and you can pay all your bills and check things. The other helpful thing I think about online banking is So when you go to an ATM and take an amount out, it's usually just going to tell you this is the amount in the local currency. It won't tell you how much it is in US dollars because that exchange rate is usually set by your bank. So if you give it a day or something like that, or wait a few hours, you can often go into online banking and see what it actually posted as and get an idea of what the exchange rate is happening. And you'll kind of get a sense for that. And you may see that the exchange rate is either getting better or worse, and get a feel for if you want to take out more or wait till later, which sounds complicated, but it'll be kind of natural as you get used to how that works. Any money questions? Okay. Communication. Okay, so you can potentially use your phone abroad, depending on your phone. My biggest advice is to think about the different types of communication that you might be having, and think about potentially splitting those and doing them not all from the same device or the same method with that device. So especially things that are in that country versus communicating with people back in the US. The options that you have for using your cell phone abroad are you can contact your carrier here in the US and ask them what the cost of their plan is to use it abroad. Usually for going for a longer period of time like you guys are going, it's probably going to be really expensive. So I'm guessing that the US carrier option is going to be crazy expensive and not worth it. Because often they'll charge something like $1.50 a minute to make phone calls, which is crazy town. Or $10 a day or something insane. Another option is if your phone is unlocked, which is, I guess, pretty common these days, or your cell phone carrier can unlock it, so it's not locked to that particular carrier, then potentially you can get a local SIM card. So you'd be changing the chip that's in your phone out for the local one. Then it would actually have that local phone number. It would be going through a local cellular network, and everything like that would follow all of those local terms. So making local calls, doing text with people locally, using local data and stuff like that would all be really affordable for being on the ground there. In that case, then it's probably kind of pricey to contact people back home because, again, you're going into that international calling piece. So then you might want to look at some alternative. Or the other option, which is pretty popular for people, is for people to just buy a cheap burner local phone, like a dumb phone or something that's really cheap for local calls, and then to use their regular cell phone on Wi-Fi for any of those kind of additional features that you want to, text or, FaceTime or Skype or whatever. With, splitting that, again, thinking about the types of contact that you want to do locally versus if you're going to contact your parents. Skype obviously is really popular. FaceTime works really well on Wi-Fi, Google Hangouts, any of those types of things. iMessage on an iPhone, there's the two colors for the bubbles. The green ones are the text messages, which are reliant on your carrier, but the blue ones actually go through Apple's systems. So those will continue to work abroad as long as you're on Wi-Fi. So you can keep iMessaging people even if you're not on a cellular network. KakaoTalk is a Korean one, WhatsApp, Snapchat, all those types of things you can use with Wi-Fi. One thing to double check with your cell phone if you are considering using it abroad, just make sure it's a world phone is usually the common term. So there's different bands that happen with that. Most modern smartphones are that, so I wouldn't worry too much. But if you do have an older phone or one with a little bit more limited functionality, double check that that's the case before assuming that it will work abroad. And then regular mail, sending postcards, asking your parents to send you a bottle of ranch dressing or fuzzy socks or something like that, can be really nice just to have a little bit of back and forth. I will often send my parents postcards from places abroad, and then they will give them back to me to put into my scrapbook. So it's kind of got that double purpose of, hey, I remember you guys are here. And then also I get to have that pretty postcard with the canceled stamps on the back. Email, internet cafes sometimes are a thing. Wi-Fi is getting to be so ubiquitous, and little wireless routers that people will get and stuff like that. If you are ever looking for internet, I don't normally say go to McDonald's, but McDonald's often has Wi-Fi, so you can go in and buy, a beverage or something like that and use their Wi-Fi if you just really need to access the internet. Social media is really, oh yeah.
Beverage without ice.
Yeah, well, it depends on the country you're in. Yeah, Mexico probably without ice. Other places, the ice might be. But yeah. Yeah, social media. So it's awesome to be able to keep in contact with people. The big caveat, though, that I have to put on that is to really think before you go about the amount of time that you want to be spending on the internet and talking with people and things like that. Because especially when you first get there and things are kind of stressful and you're not sure what's going on and you're trying to adapt, it can be really easy to spend more time than you intend talking to people back home because it's comforting and it's nice and it makes you feel better. But if you spend a lot of time talking with people back home, that will make it harder to adapt because you're not getting out and about, you're not getting used to it, you're not learning about the place that you're in. So I would really recommend setting some limits for yourself, like I'm gonna only spend a half an hour a day for the first couple of weeks talking with people back home. And once I've done that, I'm going to go, yay, this was really nice. Now I'm going to go out and do something fun, or I'm going to take a nap as needed with jet lag. Yeah, and, it's just a really nice way to keep in touch and share your experiences and stuff like that, but just keep that balance. The other thing I have to tell you that's serious is your NDSU email, even though, you'll probably get a bunch of stuff you don't care about, you're still required to check it. It's your official means of communication. So if NDSU needs to contact you or we need to contact you from my office, that's how we're going to try to contact you most of the time. So you're required to keep doing that. My tips and tricks, go in before you leave, look at all those listservs that you don't care about, and set up a filter to have them filter into some folder that you don't really have to be reading, so that the things that come into your email are probably going to be more likely to be things that you actually care about. And then maybe just set a time every week. Like on Tuesdays at 9 o'clock, I have a gap in my schedule. So I'm going to take some time and just delete, and make sure that I don't have anything that I'm missing. Because if you don't kind of deliberately think about that, you're not going to check it very often. And then potentially, you may have missed something you needed to sign for your loans. And then you're going, oh no, where are my loans? And it's like, we tried to email you 5 times about that, but you missed it because you weren't checking your email. So make sure to check that regularly. And the last big communication thing is to be sure to communicate with your parents, especially before you go. Also let them know when you get there and things like that. If you talk to them about why you want to go abroad, your budget, all your financial planning, what you're going to get out of it, what your itinerary is, they're going to be impressed with your great amount of growth and skill in this travel process, and they will respect you a lot. And then if your parents have any questions, it's really important that they contact you and then you contact our office. If your parents try to contact our office directly, usually what we'll do is we'll say, we're going to send a response to you guys. And I'll literally send an email that will say, your parent asked us this question. Here's the answer. Feel free to forward this email in its entirety to your parent. And the reason for that is you guys are an adult, and this is really, I think, an important part of the growing process for all of this, for you to have control over the questions that are being asked and for you to learn what questions to ask and what things to think about. And it also gives you control over the information that your parents are receiving. So yeah, just kind of keep that in the process. Any questions about any of this? Okay. Health. Okay, so just a few health reminders. If you haven't had any checkups recently, it's been a while, you may want to get checkups for medical, dental, eye, that kind of stuff before you leave. Some countries do require certain immunizations. You can get a bit of information if you go to the CDC website, the Centers for Disease Control website. They often have a basic overview of what's generally recommended for places that you might be going to. And they'll say like standard immunizations plus, I don't know, if you're going to a farm, you need immunizations for Japanese encephalitis or something like that. So you can get a kind of general idea. The important thing though with the immunizations is I do recommend talking to some sort of health person, either a travel clinic, which they usually have pretty good expertise on different countries, or to your regular doctor, just in case you have any special health situation things going on that might impact what their recommendations would be, whether it's to have more immunizations or fewer immunizations, depending on your situation. And that is a thing, don't do it like 2 days before you leave, because if you do need immunizations, sometimes you'll need multiple of them. Some of the immunizations, like some of the hepatitis ones, they'll have you do one and then wait a month and then do another. And then it's sometimes another couple of weeks before it becomes active fully for you. So sometime sooner rather than later, it's good to do that. And Cass Public Health has a health travel clinic. They're usually pretty affordable to go to. Sanford also has a travel clinic. They're a little bit more expensive, but those are, I think, pretty common places for people to check in. And then some visas do require a health exam, but I think that's not very common, honestly. Other things that can be helpful to know if you haven't access to them. I actually don't know my blood type still, even though I've done tons of traveling, but if it's out there, it might be good to know. Also, names of any medications that you might be taking, if you're diabetic, if you have allergies of any variety, any other kind of medical conditions. You don't have to tell our office, but make sure that your coordinator on site knows this information. And the reason for that is if you have any health emergencies, they're going to be the ones that can actually take you to the hospital and help make sure that you get the treatment that you need. So they need to have that information in case, you know, you're unconscious or something like that, so you have somebody who's able to assist you. And then reminder, carry on the plane. If you have prescription drugs, be sure to take those with you on the plane. So if your check suitcase goes missing, you're not missing your prescription. Do make sure to bring enough for the entire time that you're going to be gone. One thing also, I think I have it, yeah, is if you, especially certain medications like ADHD medications, some countries don't allow certain medications in their countries. So they may have different guidelines as far as what you can bring into the country. So if you are taking any medications, make sure you go out pretty soon here and just double check that those medications are going to be legal. And if it turns out that they're not, then you're going to want to talk to a doctor right away to talk about alternatives or ways to kind of work around that. And then if you have any non-prescription drugs or things like that, do also have that in your carry-on. If you have extra glasses or contacts or anything like that, also bring that in your carry-on. And then for any pre-existing issues, if you have anything that's significant that there's any possibility that it might be important for a doctor to know, it can be helpful to ask your physician for a letter just explaining what the condition is, because they might have different terminology or different ways of describing it abroad. If you're taking any sort of prescriptions, having both the generic name and whatever kind of the common name is here. The generic name might be more well-known abroad, versus the private name for it. And then any medications that you have, you want to leave them in the original containers. So don't put them in like a travel pill container or something like that. And the reason is because if you're going through customs and they open your bag and there's a bunch of little pills that are mysteriously unlabeled, then they can't tell necessarily the difference between this is a prescription that you're supposed to have and this is illegal drugs that you're smuggling into their country. So just save yourself the worry and keep them in the original container. And if you do have any questions about any of these types of things, please feel free to contact me and we can talk about it privately too. Okay, so almost done here. Safety and responsibility. There is something out there called the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, STEP. Once you have more information about what your address is going to be when you get there, I strongly recommend that you go out and register for STEP. This is the US government, State Department. It's just letting them know that you're in the country and this is where you are. So if there is any sort of emergency, then the US government knows that you are a citizen there and you need to be helped as well. So then they'll try to check in and they'll, if there was, well, for example, in Egypt, oh man, that's like 10 years now. When they had the kind of government overthrow, then the State Department actually evacuated US citizens out of Cairo. So those sorts of things. You're also covered under the insurance. They're watching for you too, but it is good. You know, I mean, the US government has a crazy amount of resources and military personnel and all sorts of things. So it's good to make sure that the US government knows where you are as well. There's also information out there. The State Department does travel advisories. They have 4 different levels, and you can go out and read about the country that you're going to and read all sorts of things about whether in this particular place that you might be considering going, whether there's more pickpocketing or whether there's the possibility of people doing political demonstrations, or you know, whether you should avoid this particular outskirt of town or something like that. So those are really valuable pieces of information out there. Lost passports. So first step, if you lose your passport, is don't lose your passport. It's a pain in the butt. Your passport and your forms of payment are probably the #1 thing I would say don't lose. Everything else is pretty easy to deal with. The lost passport you can deal with, but it is a pain in the butt, and you're going to lose a couple of days getting that solved. So when you're traveling, make sure you don't put your passport anywhere that somebody can easily grab it. I actually had a cousin who spent a ton of time in Europe, like 6 months in Europe, traveling all over. He came back to the US. He was standing in the line at immigration, set his passport down on the top of his suitcase, looked away, looked back, and it was gone. So it really can just go that quickly. So hold on to it, have it inside pockets, that sort of thing. A US passport, I think, is something like $25,000 on the black market. So people are really motivated to steal those things. And it's also easy to leave them places. So for example, if you go to the bathroom, don't set it on the little shelf in the bathroom stall. Don't tuck it in the seat back in front of you after you filled out landing card. Any of those things. Make sure you're always very carefully keeping track of it and putting it someplace that is safe and secure in an internal pocket. Okay. If you do lose it, which every once in a while does happen, that's where it's really important for you to have a copy of your passport somewhere to have access to, because that's going to be your proof of having had a passport and being a US citizen, and that does speed things up for you. The first step is you do have to report it lost or stolen. So you have to go to a police station usually and go through their process of doing a police report for it being missing. And then once you have that, then you have to go to a US embassy or consulate, which depending on where you are, you might have to travel to a different city to do that. And that's usually a full day thing. And then once you have a new, and it's $200. So it's not a cheap thing to get one replaced. And then once you have your replacement passport, then you're also going to have to replace your visa, which is a whole nother process to do that. So it's really an annoying process. So just be really careful with your passport. Any questions? Okay. Transportation safety. I will say, technically you may be able to drive abroad, but I don't recommend it. When I first started working at Concordia, like right away after I started, I had somebody contact me who had been on a May seminar about 8 months before, who had gotten a letter from the city of Florence saying that he owed them $500. And he was wondering, is this a thing? And so I had contacted our kind of travel contact person in Italy and asked about it. And what I found out is in Florence, they have most of the center of the city you can't drive in. It just is pedestrian only. And then on the buildings in the city, they have cameras so that if you turn off into a place that you are not allowed to drive, it will take a picture of your car on all 3 sides of the building, and you'll get ticketed for all of those. And then it took them a really long time to track it back to the rental agency and then track it back to his US address. But he did in fact owe the city of Florence $500. And everything was very well labeled in Italian, but he of course could not read Italian. So yes, potentially you can drive, but I just don't recommend it because you're still liable to all of the, driving regulations and being able to follow the signs and things like that, which may be much more difficult. And you may be driving on the other side of the road and all those types of things. But that said, I love using trains, and they are the most amazing thing. I wish we could have a metro system here in Fargo. Sadly, we're too small and we have a clay foundation and a river. Drat. And there's just a ton of really cheap, short-term flights. Buses are really nice abroad, all those different types of things. So there's a ton of ways to get around that work really well but are not driving. Another thing to be aware of, even if you're not driving, is if the cars are on the other side of the street for the way that they're driving. Be aware as a pedestrian that you need to look in the other direction so that you don't step out into traffic having done your reflex of looking in the same direction that you're used to looking. The picture there, that's actually from the UK. They have, in London, they have so many people stepping out into the street not looking the correct direction that they actually have it on the road all the time to make sure people look correctly. And then in general, when you're learning new forms of transportation, like starting to use trains and buses and stuff like that, it's just really helpful to watch what the locals are doing and just kind of learn, oh, okay, people line up in this way, or people get on and they don't talk, or they don't eat on this particular thing, or they do eat on this particular form of transportation. And you can just get a real feel for it by kind of following the lead of what other people are doing. Yeah.
Really quick, if you're on a train or subway, always have your
Mm-hmm.
put it in the seat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And sometimes they don't check them, sometimes they do, so better safe than sorry. Yeah, every country is a little different in how they do this. I've actually only ever lost a train ticket once. It was, of course, in Seoul, not in Japan. And so I went up to the ticket window thinking that it was going to be a huge deal because in Japan, it's like the rules are the rules and that's it. And then you have to pay for it. In Seoul, because they have a little different perspective in South Korea, the guy, he didn't really speak English. He just kind of gestured like, crawl under the ticket barrier. So countries are different, but yeah, keep track of your tickets. The other thing that you might run into if you're on a bus or in a car is, as compared to the rest of the world, the US has crazy wide streets, and they're also very, very straight. So you may have the experience of being in a car that seems like it's super close to other cars and that it's driving really fast around little pinhole turns and stuff like that. In a lot of other countries, that's normal. It's a little bit nerve-wracking for us because we're not used to that, but just watch what other people are doing, watch, kind of their comfort level, because it's very possible that even though we're not used to it, that it is just normal and safe. Yeah. As far as personal safety goes, just a couple of tips. Look after your friends. So, you'll probably make a pretty good group of friends really quickly when you get there, and just have each other's back. If something seems like it might be unsafe, make sure that, you're watching out for them. Tell them if you think that might not be super safe. Don't let them be alone with strange people that you don't trust, or drink beverages that seem like they're, potentially sketchy. Listen to your instincts. You guys all have an entire lifetime of having built up good instincts for these types of things. Even though you're in a different situation, you're kind of learning new information, those instincts still apply. So if that dark alleyway seems like it might be kind of nerve-wracking, even though your friends want to go down it, feel free to say, no, I think we should go on this brightly lit street over here instead. Let people earn your trust. When you get there, you are probably going to have a really kind of open-minded perspective, where you want to meet people, you want to make friends and stuff like that. But nonetheless, if somebody wants to be your friend and it just doesn't feel right, or you don't feel comfortable doing whatever with them, feel free to say no. Going and being open-minded doesn't mean that you have to say yes all the time. Some people are not trustworthy. Some people want to take advantage of foreigners and things like that. So again, trust your instincts on that. And then be aware of your surroundings. Honestly, 99% of the things that happen to people when they're traveling are related to alcohol and falling down something. So just be aware of your surroundings, watch for, steps and curbs and all of those types of things, and be aware of just basic safety things. Studying abroad, there's national statistics on this. It's actually safer than being on a college campus in the US. I think probably part of that is the driving thing. So, you're going places that are safe, but just always be aware, common sense, that sort of thing. And then in an emergency, kind of the hierarchy of people to contact are your local program director, resident director, however they're labeled, because they are the person who can actually drive you to the hospital if you need to go to the hospital. So they're physically there to help you with those types of things. Contact our office. We can help with connecting you to services that can help. We can help with communicating with insurance companies. We can coordinate with your parents if you need, and those sorts of things. Your family, of course, definitely keep your family in the loop. The big thing I will say though, with family is that if you tell them that something's happening, please keep them updated. As just an example here, if you happen to be, walking somewhere, you get lost, you call your parents and you say, "Mom, I don't know where I am. I'm in this gigantic city and I can't find where I'm supposed to go to. I'm so lost." There isn't a lot that they can do, right? They can't find the street for you. And then if you hang up and then you find the street 2 minutes later, and then you go out with your friends and you have an amazing night and you don't call your parents back, the entire night their child is lost in a foreign city dying, right? So if you tell them that something's happening, please keep them updated so they know that, the situation has been resolved or what's happening in progress for it and stuff like that, because don't give them a heart attack. And then the American Embassy, you as an American have access to all sorts of services related to that. I do have to say the American Embassy cannot get you out of jail, but they can connect you with a lawyer, they can connect you with travel services, they can visit you in jail, and things like that. They also can do some things that can be kind of random. One story I heard at a conference was about some Americans who had found a woman, a college student, who she seemed to be like drugged or out of it or something like that, who was not an American citizen, but they ended up taking her to the American Embassy because it was nearby. And then the American Embassy was able to connect her with her embassy. So she was able to get assistance and things like that. So they are a resource for connecting with services that are out there. I also, this was kind of, I guess, the stress point in my career. I did have somebody at one point who had a health emergency with an appendix, who their mom contacted me and said, my son is in Japan, and said he was having all sorts of health things or like a pain, and then stopped responding. I don't know what's happening, can you help? So I ended up calling the American Embassy to see if they could get an ambulance to go to where he was living. And they actually ended up tracking down that he had gotten an ambulance and was at the hospital. So there are different things that they can do if there's an emergency happening. He was fine. Whew, that was one of those like frantic, like 2-hour things where it's like, oh, thank God. Yeah, but, and then, okay, I apologize. I only have 3 of these. I'll have more of them for the 3rd pre-departure session, but I'll put, there's one there and then these 2 if anyone's not coming to the 3rd pre-departure session. This is the emergency action card. It is actually just something that's intended to put in your wallet. So one side has the emergency action plan, so it has the list of these are the people to contact in the case of emergency, here's some phone numbers and things like that. And then the other side has lines on it for things like putting down the contact information for your program director, the phone number if you're at a homestay, a local emergency number if you need it, stuff like that. So if you ever had an emergency, you would be able to just take this out and look at it, and it would have the information that you would need. They can also be surprisingly helpful in other ways. Katie, who's a senior peer mentor in our office, she lost her wallet at one point, and it had that in it, and it had her address. And so the police called her a couple of weeks later and said, "We seem to have your wallet." So it's worth carrying. And then I'll talk more about this at the third pre-departure session. You'll also start getting email reminders and stuff like this as you get a little bit closer. But there is an app that we have for you called Alert Traveler. The Alert Traveler app has a few things in it. It has information about all the different countries in the world that are provided through a service. It has things like the plug information, the current information, any major things about politics that are happening or cultural differences, all that stuff, so you can read up on the places that you're going. It also can send you notifications if there's events that you need to know that are happening. Like there's going to be a riot in this particular place, you may want to avoid it, or flights are delayed in this country right now, or the bus system is going to be shut down because of protests or something like that. Yeah, major weather events, like there's going to be a huge tornado or something, or there is an earthquake happening, seek shelter. The nice thing with it though is that you can set the level of alerts that you want to receive. We only require that you receive the ones that are like catastrophic emergency. The only ones that I have received in the last 6 months were Mexico related to the hurricane. But other than that, normally there's nothing that is required to come through that. You can set mid-level and lower level ones if you do want to receive more, but you can also just go in anytime and look at those if you want to see them. And then it will also work if you're planning on side trips and stuff like that. So you can put in, I'm going to go for a weekend to a different country, and then get the information for that too. And then the other function about it that's really nice is that if there is an emergency, it gives us the ability to send you a push notification to your phone that says, please check in. And then if you are having an emergency, you can actually say, I'm having an emergency, please help me. And then we'll get on it, get in touch with those resources, contact the American Embassy, contact the insurance, contact your school and stuff like that to get you assistance. Or you can say, I'm fine, and then we won't bug you anymore. So yeah, at pre-departure 3, I'll walk you guys through downloading that. So please bring a device that you might want to download it on. And then last, I have to give you the serious pep talk about responsibility. So it's important to know that the Student Code of Conduct does apply while you're abroad. So if you happen to do anything abroad that the school notifies us about, we do have to let Student Life know. So potentially you would go through at that university and then come back and have to go through conduct proceedings back here. So just don't do that stuff. Drug use, even though it is legal in some other countries, and honestly, I think a lot of drug laws are kind of crazy, I just recommend don't do drugs, right? That seems kind of silly, but like marijuana, for example, I mean, like that whole situation is changing here in the US right now, but I still recommend staying away from it just because it can be a little bit more complicated than you necessarily know. As an example, this was not at NDSU, to be clear, but I heard a story about a group that was in Belgium where they had a couple of students that went to Amsterdam for a day. They went to a coffee shop there, smoked marijuana, and then came back. And then that evening, one of the students had some sort of adverse reaction and ended up having to go to the emergency room. And what the student didn't know, and I wouldn't have known without this story, is that in Belgium, it's actually considered illegal to bring drugs into the country, and in your bloodstream is considered to be bringing it into the country. Yeah, so the program policy for that program was that if students use drugs at all, they would be removed from the program. So the faculty leader had actually sent them home immediately, which was good because the police showed up a couple of hours later to arrest the student because the hospital had to report that. So for those complicated reasons, I just recommend avoiding it. So if you really, want to do things, maybe go to Colorado when you get back. And then be responsible with sexual behavior. The CDC does have information about different concerns in different countries and things that are going on with that stuff. As far as alcohol goes, of course, realistically, people have some alcohol, but it's important to know the laws. Different countries have different different ages for being able to drink legally. So you may be legal there even if you're not legal here, or vice versa. It's important to know yourself. Of course, different people's bodies react differently to alcohol and stuff like that. So know what is a responsible amount of alcohol to be drinking. Another thing is that sometimes study abroad students get a little carried away and excited. So maybe keep an eye on what people are doing locally versus if people are getting a little bit excitably partying, and follow more of the normal level of drinking, and don't get too carried away with that. Warning signs, if you're missing class a lot or missing opportunities to go out and do things because you have a hangover, or if you're spending a lot of money on alcohol or having blackouts or any of those types of things, definitely dial it back. You know, those are the signs that you should do a little bit less. You can always drink here. Don't tell student affairs I said that, but those are things that you have access to here. You spend your time doing cultural things while you're abroad. And then lastly, just remember kind of in the back of your head that you are a representative of NDSU, of Fargo, of North Dakota, the US. You may have people that you meet who have never met an American before. And so the way that you act and kind of comport yourself is going to be their impression of Americans going forward. So, just kind of take that a little seriously in terms of being a representative and being a good ambassador to people that you meet. And in general, if you don't do it here, don't do it there. Be responsible, all that stuff. So, next steps. Some things that you might want to go out and research if you don't already know the answers. You can go out and just kind of Google any cultural differences to be aware of. If you're going someplace where the language is different, or even if they also speak English, you can go out and learn some easy words and phrases and slang and stuff in your local country to use. Check into whether you need to watch out for the drinking water, what new foods you might want to try, because there's a lot of exciting things to taste. What kind of local transportation do they use? What kind of facilities do they have access to? How's your housing work? Do you have laundry? Do they have Wi-Fi? Those types of things. We have information on our website for some diversity resources. I am a Safe Zone person, so if anyone has any questions or concerns related to that, please talk to me. And then also there's a lot of books and websites and things that are out there. A couple of books listed at the top. We have information in your application if you haven't read it. That's kind of general. One thing that can be kind of cool is you can Google blogs of other people who have studied abroad or lived in the country that you're going to be in and get some ideas of things that they've done that have been interesting or fun or that you might want to check out. And that can help you get kind of excited about the opportunities that you're going to have. And then our third pre-departure session is going to be coming up in just under 2 weeks. So this is on a different day than these first two were. This is on a Wednesday, not on a Thursday. The reason for that is because we're combined with the people who are doing the 1 credit class, as well as I'll be inviting returnee students that have been to the countries that people are going to, and then I'll be seating you by area of the world so you guys can all chat and ask questions and make all sorts of exciting plans and stuff like that. Please RSVP by next Wednesday. I'll be sending out emails probably tomorrow just to check in with people based on what you said. I'll probably send an email either saying, you said you would probably come, are you still planning on coming? Or you said you couldn't come, have your schedule changed such that you might be able to come or something like that. Yeah.
I have a class that ends at 5, but you're working coming in half an hour.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Just RSVP and say you'll come for the last half an hour and I'll make a note. I actually do little name cards, so I can just make a note saying you'll be here at 5. Yeah, and we'll also have t-shirts and little stuffed bison for our photo contest with little study abroad t-shirts on them. You can tell I get really excited about the stuffed bison and all of those types of things and food and stuff like that. And then if anyone has a letter to yourself that you would like to turn in, please give it to me. Otherwise, feel free to bring it to the third one. The letter to yourself, if you don't remember or didn't get to that end of the last video, is just literally a letter to yourself. Write anything in it I will give it back to you after you get back so you can read it. So it's kind of a good place to talk about your hopes and dreams and fears and all those types of things. So when you get back, you can be like, oh, I get that. Like I remember feeling that way, but oh, I totally got this. So it's just kind of a neat way to make yourself a little time capsule. So any questions? Yeah.
Do you encourage making an email, like a new email, and like a new like social media page?
Yeah, I mean, you may not need to make a new email, but social media, sometimes people do like, I'm going to start an Instagram or something like that that's going to be just specific to my trip. And those can be kind of nice in terms of, I don't know, if you have like family that you don't normally interact with on social media, you can have something that you can kind of focus on. Or they can be useful in terms of almost like resume building kind of things. Like here's something that's showing this really interesting international experience I had, or it can just be a fun thing. Like I'm going to take, I don't know, I'm going to take pictures of fixtures abroad that look like faces, you know, like just something that's like a fun little project to do while you're gone. So if there's anything that kind of strikes your fancy with that stuff, that can be really cool. All right. So I will be reaching out to people and I'll see you in